Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
A diesel-powered engine on a farm works hard and operates in a grueling environment. Soy biodiesel fuels stand up to the challenge of powering farm equipment, but are also renewable and environmentally responsible as well. The Nebraska Soybean Board is committed to encouraging the use of soy biodiesel to protect the environment and sustain Nebraska's agriculture. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Kate Brooks takes a look at cattle markets. Bruce Brodersen updates us on the Porcine Epidemic Diarrhea virus. Alan Vinalik examines ag land leasing in Nebraska, and Klein Ileleji discusses grain storage after harvest. Monday's crop progress report shows U.S. farmers have harvested 86% of their soybeans and 73% of their corn. Here at home, Nebraska is ahead of the 5-year averages for progress in both corn and soybeans. The state's farmers are nearing completion with 97% of beans harvested and moving along with 71% of corn picked. UNL Extension livestock economist Kate Brooks is our cattle market analyst this week. We talked with Kate Wednesday afternoon about fed cattle prices, farmers and ranchers holding heifers for expansion, and if there were any surprises in last week's cattle on feed report.
Not really. It was a delayed report. We won't get into all those, right. But being a delayed report, it was probably a neutral, more neutral than anything type of report, just further emphasizing the tightening supplies that we continue to see.
Yeah, those number of cattle on feed actually has been in a downward trend here for over a year now.
Yes, and we were down again, I think about 7.5% over last year. So again, continuing to see that decline in cattle on feed numbers.
As you look at the slaughter numbers and the slaughter weights, and obviously this will kind of play a part probably in the future with Zilmax and the Zilpaterol, but are they starting to decline at all yet? Have you noticed anything?
We are starting to see a decline in slaughter weights. There's two things going on. We're placing heavier animals into the feedlot, so when we place heavier animals, we tend to put out lighter animals. And then as well, the use of the beta agonists. So we're starting to see a decline in our dress weights, which again will further, decline our meat supply.
Let's talk about heifers. First of all, is there any sign that there's some heifer retention here which would indicate expansion? We're
starting to see some declines in cattle on feed heifers on the cattle on feed inventory. We saw a decline last year, a very rapid one into the end of 2012. We saw an increase at the beginning of this year when we started to place heifers again due to weather issues. But we're starting to see that decline here in this October 1 report.
And the people that are buying them, does it indicate that they're buying them for a breeding stock?
We're starting to see some price differences between breeding heifers and feeder heifers in the market reports, showing some interest more on the demand side for retention purposes.
Now, obviously, if you keep back those heifers and you're going to use them to try and expand the herd in the long term, the short-term indication would be that there's going to be less meat available for the consumer.
Correct.
So is that going to be a concerning issue?
It is. We have a lot of things going on. We have low numbers to begin with. As we start to rebuild the herd, we're going to pull more heifers out, retain them. That's going to decline the numbers further. The other thing is cow numbers. We're starting to see a decline in cow slaughter numbers as we start to reduce the number of cull cows we're sending to market, which will further decrease that beef supply.
On the way to a record harvest here in the U.S., well underway. How much help has $4 to $4.50 corn been for those people who are feeding extraordinarily high input prices?
Compared to that $7 corn we'd seen, $4 corn is, really a good number. It's starting to decline those feed costs for a lot of guys. The issue is, those calf prices continue to increase. We continue to see record high prices on that side, cutting into some of those profits.
Those calf prices are still making it hard to go.
They'll start to offset, and the higher we get, the more offset we're going to be.
With the way the current fed market is there an opportunity here to make a profit at all?
There's still some opportunities depending on how you market, the animals, but we're not seeing much trade within the live cattle, fed cattle side. We're still trading around 130, just not seeing any increases on the fed cattle side.
There was a huge spike a couple weeks ago here. What do you expect as we go towards the end of 2013?
There's still some opportunities for that to increase. We're not seeing much trade on the cash side, and we're not seeing that price increase a lot, but we're continuing to see tighter supplies. And our box beef price hit back above $200 again here after June. I think this morning it was at 203. I think yesterday we closed at 205 per hundredweight. So, there is some possibility for that price to increase, but the packers are going to try to continue to hold on to the profits that they can get too.
What about a rancher or farmer who's trying to buy it to place in the feedlot? Are those prices affordable?
That's something they're going to have to start looking at. As feeder calf prices continue to rise. We've kind of maybe seen, I don't want to say, a pause,
right,
whether or not they're going to continue to jump. They're not increasing like they were the previous 4 months, but there's maybe some opportunities there for the feeders.
Because the November crop report was released after our taping, we're unable to cover it in this show, but we did talk with Elaine Cub after the release to get her thoughts on the USDA's latest numbers. That interview can be found on the Market Journal website and through our Facebook and YouTube pages. Next week, Colorado State University economist Steve Kuntz will be our grain marketing analyst as we cover the 4-state crop insurance workshop in Grand Island. Nebraska is not currently one of the states positive for the porcine epidemic diarrhea virus, but a drop in daily temperatures and less help from the sun could crack a window for PEDv to enter. In May, scientists discovered the virus in 3 of the country's top 5 pork-producing states. Late last month, another group of scientists from several universities traced the U.S. strains to an eastern Chinese province. This week, we talked with UNL veterinarian Bruce Brodersen about biosecurity precautions producers should be taking as the virus continues to spread across the country.
The most recent information that I've received is that there's been another 68 cases or so reported, new farms infected in the country, but still none in Nebraska yet. And that 68 new cases were in the last week or so of October.
Since we're approaching the time when those temperatures aren't going to be up in the 90s or 80s, the sun's not out as long, how big of a deal is it to a virus like PED?
Well, as we all know, PEDv is similar to TGE virus. They're both coronaviruses, and those viruses will last in the environment for a long period of time, particularly in organic matter such as manure and bedding and those types of things. And when it's cold, refrigerator temperatures, that virus can last for several weeks to months even. So compared to regular room temperatures, it dies off pretty quickly.
Give me a refresher of what producers should be looking for in the barns.
Okay, where the virus is going to have its most effect will be in the farrowing units. So those newborn pigs, those pigs that are just 1 to 2 weeks of age, are going to show signs of severe diarrhea. As the pigs get older, those pigs will also have diarrhea, but the mortality will be a lot lower in the older pigs compared to the pigs in the farrowing rooms.
Now, because this is sort of a mirror of TGE, this is not something that a producer could self-diagnose?
That's correct. It's the signs are very similar. The severity has been reported to be a lot more severe than TGE, but clinically you can't really tell the difference between the two.
Let's talk about biosecurity. What are some things that producers can do or need to do to ensure that their facilities are as clean and safe as they can possibly be?
Well, the main thing that a producer needs to be aware of is to not take anything home from town or from the farm or to the farm in terms of tracking mud or manure or anything like that. They should change clothes before they go to town, and then change clothes back to something different when they get back home. If they're hauling pigs to a market of some sort, it's very important to clean that trailer, clean the inside of the pickup very well and disinfect it as best you can, or very thoroughly, more than just best you can, but to be very thorough in how you clean the trailer and pickup or truck when you return home.
Anything specific when you talk about specific disinfectants that you can use, or how strong you need to go?
Yeah, there's a few disinfectants that should work against coronaviruses. Bleach, first of all, would work. Virkon S, one-stroke Environ are examples of a couple of different disinfectants that will work against it. The quaternary amines are not as effective against those that virus as those other disinfectants are.
The truck stops, are those a safe place to go? I mean, how do you handle a situation like that?
Well, again, you have to be aware that people are going to be tracking things in and around, so be sure you could wear disposable boots or whatever just to make sure that those are gotten rid of before you go home.
In a long-term outlook here, is this a situation where we're going to be looking at this every single month and every single year like PERS and TGE now?
I'm afraid so. I mean, now that it's here and it's spread through several states in the United States, why, it's probably going to be here to stay. Yet there's no vaccine yet to help control it, so any herd that gets exposed will be a naive herd, and so the disease is going to be pretty severe in those cases. So we're kind of it's here for the long haul, I think.
The American Association of Swine Veterinarians has web pages devoted to PEDv studies, numbers, and biosecurity precautions, such as information on disinfectants and videos showing how to wash trailers safely by using 3 pairs of disposable boots. We'll link to that information on our website at mj.unl.edu. Jerry Wallen of Palmyra launched into the world of cover crops this season and likes what he sees. The young producer flew a cover crop blend into growing corn early this fall, and he's now featured in this month's Nebraska Farmer. Wallen and his father Wayne have practiced no-till for 20 years, and Jerry says planting cover crops is the next step to building soil biomass, organic matter, and overall soil health. In August, Jerry and 24 other farmers joined together to hire a helicopter to oversee cover crop blends on about 800 acres in southeast Nebraska. This same group has also formed a Healthy Soils and Cover Crop Learning Community to gain more knowledge about the practice. You can read more about it in the November Nebraska Farmer. Throughout November and December, ag land tenants and landlords will have the opportunity to attend free workshops aimed at developing fair leases and improving communication. Nebraska's land prices continue to rise, with the all-land average increasing 25% from 2012 to 2013. Those levels could be a concern, with commodity prices about $3 less than a year ago. UNL Extension educator Alan Vanalik joined us this week to talk about how lease partners can develop appropriate agreements in a time with persistent volatility.
Yeah, we have to understand that in the last 6 years, land prices have virtually doubled, not virtually doubled. They have more than doubled, and then the cash rents have more than doubled too. So yeah, it's a very volatile market. It's way up there. It's higher than anybody ever expected it to be.
One thing that's different than last year is that there aren't those high commodity prices in corn and soybeans that could support maybe $500 per acre on a cash basis. How do you factor that in when you think about trying to price out that piece of land?
People have been asking me that question, especially the tenants have been asking me that question. They're playing the high rents, and you know, if you want to start with a rule of thumb, and I'm just using this as a starting point, consider that you would want to get about 30% of the gross revenue per acre to the landlord with no expenses other than their taxes. And so if you took a 200 bushel yield corn times $4 a bushel, which is about what it's worth right now, it's $800 gross, and that times 30% is about $240 for cash rent. Now I know a cash rent's much higher than that, but that would be a way of actually using actual production and actual prices to determine where cash rent might be, where we should start that negotiation.
And like you say, it is a negotiation. There's obviously no silver bullet or one formula that works for everyone. So one thing you try and do in these workshops is increase those lines of communications. Yes.
Well, yes, of course, and you know, I gave you kind of the 30% rule, and that's a little bit of a fallacy, because quite honestly, it's still not what some formula says. It still has to be about what the landlord is willing to accept and what the tenant is willing to bid, and it still has to be about the pure supply and demand. And right now, our demand is still exceeding our supply.
When we talked about a year ago in November, one of the things that stuck out to me was when you mentioned how little of the land actually turns over in Nebraska compared to historic perspectives. Does that still stand?
It is for 2013. Now in the fall of 2012, we had a lot of uncertainty about what was happening with our land taxes in terms of estate tax and those kind of things, capital gains taxes for the future. And so there was a lot of sales in the fall of 2012, but the sales have gone flat. As I've talked to ag realtors, we're pretty low level sales for 2013. Typically in Nebraska, land would turn over at about 3% a year. So you'd have a particular piece of ground come up for sale about once every 30 to 35 years, and we've been running down less than 1%, which means a particular piece of land won't come up for sale except once for every 100 years. So there's a really tight supply right now.
Is it still a safe investment? You look at all land across Nebraska increased by 25% from last year, 32 and 22% the years before that. Do you still think it's something that is a safe place to put money?
Well, it's obviously not returning what it did before.
Sure.
Because for a couple of decades we were running land as a return on investment at 5 to 7%. Now it's dropped to 2, 3, 4%, depending on what you paid for the land and what you have invested into it. So it's a 2, 3, 4% investment instead of a 6, 7% investment. So is 2, 3, 4% a good investment? Well, compared to past savings at 0.15 and CDs at 0.45, and stock market being kind of volatile, it still cooks along at least some rate.
Now, specifically with these workshops you're holding across the state of Nebraska, what are some things that either tenants or landlords have been able to get out of them in the past?
We did over 20 workshops last year, and we did a 6-month follow-up survey with the folks that participated, and we had over 250 people respond to that 6-month follow-up survey, and they indicated they increased their communication between landlord and tenant. They started to use more written leases. They understood the lease provisions better, so they could ask better questions of each other on the leases. And we had a good understanding of what a flex lease meant, and we had some flex lease provisions put into that, which is being very fair to both parties, both the landlord and a tenant. So people coming to one of these workshops are going to get a wealth of knowledge about what's going on with the industry, how to do proper communication, how to set up that lease arrangement in terms of the contract, and a little bit about flex leasing too.
The landlord-tenant lease workshops began this week and are being held at 26 sites across Nebraska in November and December. The events are free and sponsored by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the North Central Risk Management Agency. You can find a list of locations on our website. Even though there isn't a cost, you're encouraged to register for the workshops to ensure there are enough handouts. Nebraska's corn harvest is 5 points ahead of the 5-year average, with 71% complete as of the latest crop progress report. However, the latest state report noted high moisture levels have slowed the advancement. That, coupled with farmers possibly holding on to grain longer than usual, means drying and storage will be important factors in maintaining quality. Earlier this week, we spoke with Purdue University Extension engineer Klein Ileleji about how you can ensure your grain stays in the best possible quality through winter and into 2014.
One of the things you have to note is that grain is a biological material, and so it's prone to deterioration based on the initial quality you put in your bin. So the importance of bringing in grain with good quality is that since you're not going to get your grain to improve in quality during storage, it can only go downhill. You want to bring grain with good quality to begin with.
What we're hearing in Nebraska, Klein, is that a lot of the corn is not drying down in the field, and farmers, especially in irrigated situations, are having to take it out at maybe 20%, maybe a little bit higher moisture. If they're going to store that for a decent amount of time, where do they need to dry that down to maintain optimum quality?
Once you get late in the season, when the weather changes, we have more wetter weather, you have precipitation, high relative humidities, you don't have good quality air to affect dry down. And so what we advise is that at this time, farmers have no option but to bring it into the bin. And the importance of bringing it in early is at least you save yourself from the risk of any bad weather that could take place at this time. Typically, you want to dry your grain as low as 15% or 14.5, depending on how long you're going to carry it into next year. We have a good crop this year. I've heard of a talk that we could see farmers storing into the summer. And so if you want to keep your grain for that long, you want to dry your grain as low as 15% at least.
Now, how do you make sure that you don't over dry it? Because obviously, the drier you go, the the more dollars you might be shedding off there. So how do you make sure that you don't go below that 14.5 to 15 level?
What you want to do is typically, depending on the drying system, because you have a lot of different drying systems out there. Depending on the drying systems, you want to dry your grain to at least in a high temperature dryer to at least 16%, and then you can probably take the last 1% points off using aeration, or sometimes you could dry it as high as 17% and take the last 2 points with aeration. But one thing I want to note here is that at this time of the season, when the weather is not as good in terms of the relative humidity is high, aeration will not work as well. We're getting to the point where we at the later stage when aeration will work effectively, so until the spring.
What temperature would you like that to be at now? And as you go through winter, how do you need to monitor to make sure it stays around that safe level?
Very good. One of the importance of temperature is that temperature actually is one of the factors that determines the rate at which grain will deteriorate, or the rate at which fungi, which deteriorates grain, will grow. The lower the temperature, the better or the longer that grain will store. So you want to keep your grain for as low as 40 degrees Fahrenheit and below. You want to keep that grain as cool as possible. And since we stay in a temperate climate, as long as we have good low air temperatures and the relative humidity is not high, we don't have rain, you can pretty much cool that grain with aeration to as low as 40 or below. And you want to maintain that grain temperatures as low as possible through the winter and even into the spring to the summer. Cooling below 40 degrees Fahrenheit is the best way to retard deterioration. And you want to cool it as fast as you can.
As you look at checking on those bins during the winter, you say you might be able to get away with it only checking once a month, but you also write that you should maybe look at the trend when you take the temperature, not the absolute temperature. Why is that?
What you want to do is not to check and just acquire just the temperature at the point at which you check your grain. You want to keep tabs. Make sure you record those temperatures to see the trend, because it's the trend in temperatures that give you an idea if the grain is deteriorating or it's maintaining its condition. So an instantaneous temperature data point will not give you a good idea of what's going on. But over time, if you see the trends in temperatures going high, then that's an indication you're having some deterioration going on. If your trends remain the same, then that's an indication that probably nothing is going on.
Klein says there are also other things you can do to help ensure optimum grain quality in bins, including removing spills around the structures and cleaning equipment after each use. Now with this week's weather forecast, here's UNL Extension State Climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here we are again for the weekly forecast. Of course, this past week we had an impressive storm system move across the Central Plains. And in eastern Nebraska, many locations received at least an inch of rain with some isolated pockets of 2 inches of rain. And if we want to talk about it monthly totals, typically in November we get between 1.2 and 1.5 inches across the eastern third of the state, depending on location. So there are some locations that received a month's worth of precipitation with this system. Further west, of course, we've seen the snow fly with this system, and we talked about that last week, that there was a chance from central Nebraska through northeast Nebraska for snowfall. It was a little bit heavier than the models initially forecasted, particularly as you got up into the Panhandle, where this is the second very large system that has impacted that region. And we have a few isolated pockets in the extreme northern Panhandle that have breached the 20-inch snowfall mark for this year, with unofficially up to 3 foot of snowfall that has been reported. And of course, a lot of that came with the blizzard. Now, in terms of eastern Nebraska, since October 1st, we have received anywhere from 4 inches up to 8 inches of moisture. So that puts us anywhere from 2 to upwards of 3 to 4 inches above normal. And if you consider this, we could go without precipitation in these heavier precipitation areas of the state all the way through the end of February and still be normal in regards to precipitation from October 1st through the end of February. So it's been an impressive start to the soil moisture recharge year. I'm sure there's more to come. If the winter is any indication of what these last systems are, it's going to be a rough one. Let's take a look at the upper air models and see what we can store at least for this next week. And this is especially in regards to harvest activity. The one thing we'll draw your attention to is the trough that moved through the northern plains. Now sits over the Great Lakes. That system moved across yesterday, now parked over the Great Lakes. There is going to be some clouds and precipitation with this system, and some of that might infiltrate into Ann Arbor during game time. For us, it looks like fairly clear conditions with a warming trend through the weekend. Fairly cool conditions in northeast Nebraska, much warmer in western Nebraska, fairly close to the upper 50s, lower 60s. As we get into tomorrow, we'll see that the warm air tries to bubble up a little bit more, so we could be looking easily into the low to mid 50s in northeast Nebraska, mid 60s possibly across southwest Nebraska. Now on Monday, that Great Lakes system decides to kind of pull a little bit cooler air down, and we'll see a frontal boundary kind of try to slide through the state late Monday into Tuesday, which could give us a few flurries, but because the source of moisture is coming from the northwest, it doesn't look like much output at the surface. On Tuesday, that system really digs down deep. We get this big cold blast coming through eastern Nebraska, western Nebraska. We'll start to see the ridge building in, and we'll see a rebound in temperatures. And then it looks like clear sailing for the remainder of the week, just a little weak wave, a few clouds, but it doesn't look like any precipitation with this. As we get into Thursday, we see one little trough coming through. Right now, no moisture associated with the system, just clouds and a few sprinkles. And then that system bypasses us, and we start to see a trough digging into the western United States to pump up the warm air into our region. So the forecast looks like this. We'll see some warm conditions this weekend, then we have that chance, light chance in the Tuesday time frame for a little scattered light precipitation, and then a gradual warming trend toward the week. 8 to 14 day forecast brings that big ridging pattern to the eastern United States with above normal temperatures in terms of precipitation. Of course, with a ridge with higher temperatures, we also look for below normal precipitation in our region.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews with Kate Brooks, Bruce Brodersen, Alan Vinalik, and Klein Ileleji are available individually on our website and through the Market Journal mobile app. Next week, Steve Kuntz from Colorado State University will be our grain marketing analyst as we report from the 4-State Crop Insurance Workshop in Grand Island. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Soybeans are found on dinner tables around the world. Some form of the soybean is found in baby foods, snacks, cooking oils, and many other food items eaten daily. And soybeans provide the protein in the diets for livestock and fish. The Nebraska soybean farmers support research to develop new soy-based products for foods, livestock, and industrial uses through their checkoff dollars. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.